Welcome back to Built to Ship, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with founders and product leaders shipping real AI products into the world. I'm your host, Tyler Postal from Voker, and today I'm excited to be joined by Karim. Thanks for joining, Karim.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
Yeah,
And hello, everyone. I'm Karim, the founder of FabrikLabs.
yep. Thanks so much for joining us. FabrikLabs is a platform that helps teams simulate and evaluate AI agents and workflows before they hit production, catching hidden failures and building more reliable systems. But I'm sure, Kareem, you're going to share more about that with the audience. Let's start with your background. What were you doing before Fabric Labs? How did you have the idea?
Sure. In fact, I was graduating somewhere around 2023 with applied math and computer science and my master's in data science. I was working at General Motors at machine learning department, and we were building self-driving cars. And ironically enough, I was building simulation environments for self-driving cars. So they were running reinforcement learning on their models to improve the performance of the self-driving models. The cars would not bump into people, would not bump into different stuff, and actually would go where they need to go. And the best way to do this is actually simulation environment, since you cannot run test runs like in the physical world all the time. I was responsible for building these simulation environments for self-driving cars. Unfortunately, General Motors, somewhere around 2022, 2023, they started seeing that it's not very financially sound for them to have the self-driving department, which they called Cruise. There's like some people working in General Motors. There were some people who worked in Cruise. It was one thing. They owned Cruise. And they decided to shut that down. And this was pretty much over for me for self-driving stuff. And I also became one of the co-founders of Mort.ai with my co-founder, uh, David, who was a senior software engineer at Bank of America. And we were building AI agents for mortgage lenders. He was actually working on the back-end stuff of mortgage lending platform for Bank of America. So he knew how all the processes work, like how the underwriting worked, how most of the lenders communicated with all their third parties. And what we were building is essentially an AI agent that communicated with third parties on lenders' behalf. Like,
Interesting.
it's it was an AI agent that was able to communicate with real estate agents, with employers, as well as with HOA, insurance, and title companies needed for that essentially borrower. Unfortunately, my co-founder had to leave due to family reasons,
Hmm.
but we actually had some success because our agent is still running in cross-country mortgage and Stewards and Capital Co-lending. And I built quite a few agents, let's say, through my career,
Hmm.
uh, let's say like this. And one of the themes that I noticed when I was building agents is I've never used the traditional evals, even though they're very, very needed. The reason
Hmm.
being is they're absolutely not suited for agentic workflows. So imagine more AI, a fairly complex architecture of an agent. Like, it's not something that calls one tool or draws from one context. It's essentially multiple agents that communicate with different, every single one of them with different system prompt that communicate. One of them communicates with HOA, one of them communicates with insurance, and they have a single memory. So all their sessions are recorded in a single memory. It's a combination of the knowledge graph and a traditional SQL database that they're drawing from based on the borrower that we just processed. And this kind of workflow is quite difficult to evaluate when you have a traditional just a data set type of eval of essentially a golden data set. Like, this is an input, this is the output, this is correct output, this is what it should be. And there's an LLM as a judge, which is very generic, that's going to
Yeah.
judge it. So it's never worked. And I also was part of accelerator called Antler, which is
Hmm.
one of the most competitive accelerators. They're okay, of course, 60 to 70% of them, of the founders, were building AI agents. What I've noticed is none of them are using eval tools, because none of them uh, are suited for actually agent ops and for complex agent workflows. For long running agents, what you have to do is not some observability tool, that is essentially going to observe something that is happening post production and like weeks after you put it in there. You need something that makes sure that AI agent doesn't screw up your customers immediately before production. And moreover, you also need something that evaluates the entire workflow. And ironically enough, simulation environment that I worked in General Motors, very, very similar approach we are applying in FabrikLabs, and we are reimagining the way evals are done from just an observability tool, something that generates synthetic users. It's like an AI users of your agent that would be able to use your agent before production. And we would be able to, on the back end of the logs and traces, would be able to see what is wrong. Not only
Very
that,
cool.
we invented Fabric CLI, which is essentially very, very similar to Cloud Code that scans your entire code base and understands what kind of synthetic users and what kind of synthetic golden dataset needed for your AI agent
Mm,
specifically.
amazing. Okay, yeah, there's a lot there, a lot of really great insights that I want to kind of like make sure I understood and play back for the audience. So first of all, it sounds like you're building something where you have a deep understanding of the pain. You've experienced like what happens when you build agentic systems. Sure, you can have a golden data set. A lot of people do that for offline evaluation before you launch to production, but that's like you're putting it in this sterile environment. You're not really exposing it to what could happen in the wild and what could go wrong. And you mentioned that most people shipping agents today, they don't use evals. They maybe have an observability tool, but they really don't have a lot of insights other than digging through logs to see what's going wrong with their agents. I've seen the same thing with all the folks we've talked to on the podcast, across our customers, across the ecosystem we work with. It's a minority of people who even use evals. And when they do, it's normally pretty either like very specific and programmatic, like did this, API call work or not, or it is something where you're just asking an LM as a judge to say, was this right or not? And I think both of those aren't like a full solve to the problem. So I really want to kind of dive in here because it's a pretty important and interesting like space that I think is still really early and very much needed for AI systems. Maybe let's start with like what you mentioned about the previous company you worked at. First, tell us like what's the shape of your agent architecture there for the mortgage lending and all of that. You mentioned there's multiple agents, maybe they have multiple tools. Let's use that as an illustration of an example, because I would assume that that business or a business like them would be a good customer of Fabric, right? And so maybe start there. What was the architecture there? You mentioned there's multiple agents. Are there handoffs, et cetera?
You're actually exactly correct. I mean, the first thing that we tested Fabric on it was my Morty AI code base. Ironically enough, because it is it's a perfect client of us. Something that is fairly more complicated than like a single tool call or a context, which is majority of the startups are building that. Like none of the serious companies that are building AI agents are building a single RAG pipeline or building like something that is a single tool call. Like maybe like something within the marketing, there's some people that are building like sort of the plugin single API call solutions, but most of the stuff that bring value are running for quite a time to actually bring some value. And in our case, why we have multiple agents, right? Obviously, because each of them have different system prompts, and how they work is essentially they're connected to like TTS slash SCT, which is like text to speech and speech to text. We used Retail and then we used VAPI for a shorter period of time, which is essentially a wrapper around like ElevenLabs API to like create voice AI and like have like a convenient way of like actually calling. And those AI agents are capable of like calling actual real humans and communicating with. So that problem is not that big because many people think the voice AI is like very problematic, but essentially a lot of the problems are like on the API level itself. It's not dependent on you as a developer. Uh, the biggest problem is primarily agentic. It's the context management while all that happens. So let's say you like there was a call to an insurance agent, and you, for example, got insurance for your customers. First of all, you also have to notify your customers that you actually got insurance, and you also have to notify your realtor as soon as that happens. And the thing is, like, it's not very clear even most of the times when you will get insurance because, like, uh, yes, like for example, your insurance agent would like send you a document or say like, okay, I'll give you this and this coverage. So the AI agent had to plug it out of the context of like a conversation during the phone call and has to be able to find the right people to communicate it back. Sometimes it's customers, sometimes it's realtors, and sometimes HOA needs it. And you need it reliably. You need it to be reliable, very, very reliable at context management and like retrieving the context from any data layer that you have. It could be like a knowledge graph, it could be a database, or it could be like something that you have where you manage your sessions and like essentially all your stuff. We actually have like a combination. I essentially had like for each of the huge borrowers that we have, like the borrowers that have like a lot of documents and the borrowers have like that had a lot of calls to like all the third parties, HOAs, insurance, and title companies. There was like a, a knowledge graph that essentially would be able that will allow the AI agent to retrieve the data. For most of them, it was just like a markdown file because they're actually not that big, and plus their financial documents. And you have to juggle through it. And let's imagine it's something even more complicated than mortgages, right? So any legal documents, there's an enormous amount of context management. And imagine it's a large company. Large company has like an enormous amount of tools within its corpus. It's hard to imagine for us because we've never seen something like Claude Code working outside of the coding infrastructure. But this is
Yeah.
how the agents will work in the future. It's not going to be something like ChatGPT. You will write your text and query and it will do something. If you ever use Claude Code in your entire life, sometimes you can actually set it up and it will work for 2-3 hours. There's like an entire like
Mhm.
new like trend of like this Ralph. I forget what it's Ralph whatever, where you just put the Claude Code on a dangerous mode, you run it the while loop, and it runs for 30 hours. And if it worked, wonderfully. If it didn't, you just throw it out, like try again.
Yeah.
But this is
I
the
want to
way
dig
it's
into
gonna.
that real quick. Like
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
mentioning
yeah.
this trend that, hey, we're right now that a lot of AI startups or even big companies, they're building toys, really, right? Which is important. We need to do that to figure out, where are the challenges, what can we do with the technology. But more and more it's evolving into multi-agent systems with multiple tool calls with complex context that are maybe long running. And the key here, just to make sure the audience is understanding, long running meaning like, you set it off and it's autonomously doing maybe multiple tasks over the period of minutes, hours, days, even possibly. Like that is in a way the promise of AI, right? That these agents will be able to take these actions on your behalf. You
Exactly.
bring up a really good point that one of the biggest challenges there is context management. That's probably a whole separate thing of like, hey, how do you engineer your agent well to like give it the right context, etc. But let's focus a little bit on like, how do we test? Let's say we think we did that. We think that we set up an agent with the right context, the right knowledge graph, the right way of like keeping certain context when the context window is, getting full and throwing out context that's not important. How do you propose that people evaluate and test? I'm sure it's part of your product in Fabric. You can write an eval that's like, you give an example of, here's some mortgage document, ask the AI a question about it. Here's the right answer. Either programmatically check or ask an LM as a judge if it got it right. But the real world's never like that. So what's different about how Fabric approaches it? And what's your sort of mantra on how people should be doing like evals?
I strongly believe that we need something like, it sounds very, very, very outlandish, but I strongly believe we need something like Cursor for evals. And what I mean by that, it's not even going to be used necessarily by founders. It's going to be used by founders as well, but it's also going to be used if you, especially if you're a startup, it's going to be used by your design partners. Many people don't know, but the biggest creators and the biggest authors of your evals are not necessarily going to be your even the founders or like co-founders or like definitely not even engineers. I'm coming from a data science world. I know because most of the engineers, they build unit tests and they don't understand why it like fails in production, because it's not a software issue, it's an agentic issue. And most of the times, what you have to do is essentially the people who are in your vertical and know your vertical really well. If you are building an agent for insurance brokers, what you're going to do, you actually might like give your product for free for the first of your customers, for first of 5 your customers, and say, hey guys, do you want to work with me and help me to build evals, because you know what is correct answer, what is not correct answer, what is correct workflow, what is not the correct workflow, and like dedicate at least like 30-40 minutes like a day of your time. Maybe I'm like gonna pay you, so you're gonna help me with that. And what essentially we are building is a 2-tier solution. Is first, we're scanning your entire code base. We're scanning every single tool call and context call that you make. So we are building the simulation environment specifically for your AI agent. So the synthetic user sends a query that is designed to call a certain tool or designed to call a certain context. And we know before even that query comes to to reality, what kind of context and what kind of tool it has to call. And essentially, we are already have the golden data set. We have the goldens, the grounding, and we already know what kind of tool call and context call that has to be made. And this way,
how do you have those right answers? How do you have those golden answers if it's a
very
simulation?
very good question. That actually Fabric CLI helps it helps us with this, because essentially what we're doing, we're scanning your entire code base. We're getting every single tool call that you have and every single context call that you have, and we are putting it into entire Docker sandbox, which we are running in the machine, and we are retrieving the necessary, for example, the documents from your like knowledge graph or like from your database, or something like a running tool, and we're grouping them. So those are grouped files for a specific operation. So this is
Workflow.
needed.
Yeah.
Yes, this workflow needs for this stuff and stuff like this. And based on that, we are kind of reverse engineering it back to an input. What kind of
Interesting.
input is needed to actually trigger that workflow? This is the
I see.
way we're actually grounding it and like making sure that the workflow on the grounding side is actually actually a golden data set that is correct.
Yeah. I
And
want
we
to pause there and just highlight some of the things that you shared that I think are, again, important takeaways. You mentioned, I think, people need to hear this loud and clear. Evals, sure, engineers can write some evals. Those are unit tests. That's okay. But at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about agentic systems that start to have a ton of capabilities, you need the end user or the subject matter expert or the domain expert, which might be your customer or even sometimes like your customer's user, to create and designate those evals.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you can't make it too onerous. They can't have to like write code to create these evals, and that's maybe why you're proposing this idea for like a cursor for evals. So it's maybe a little easier for these less technical. They're not AI experts, but they are domain experts. The mortgage lenders, the insurance broker, etc. And they need to tell you what's good, and accurate, and what's not. Is that
exactly
right?
Exactly. And that's why this is going to be like a cursor for evals for them. It's going to be a bar. It's going to be the same diffs folder that they're going to have, and they essentially will review all the evals that are written by an agent, by Fabric CLI, and they're going to give their feedback. And this is essentially how we're going to have an enormous amount of human in the loop. And the human in the loop will be actually the domain expert. So he doesn't need to know how to code. He doesn't need to know how to like build unit tests. He doesn't need to know like what is LLM as a judge. He doesn't need to know what is like an appropriate data set or something like this. But he knows his domain expertise, and everything else will be handled by Fabric CLI. That is essentially going to build and all that stuff into the project and visualize it.
That's great. Well, just to kind of like wrap up what you shared before we get close to time here. Number one, evals are really important, but at the same time, they take a lot of time to maintain and create. They don't have full coverage. They're often being created today by the builders, not the end users or the domain experts. And I've heard this across a lot of companies. They start with setting up evals, and then it's too much work to maintain them because they add new features to the product. They give the agents new tool calls. Now they have to go do more work to add new evals. It's hard to keep up with, and it's not testing, the true system in production. And so that's where you're proposing that we have we need a solution, which is going to be Fabrik, that will allow the domain experts to build like more real world evaluations. I think today there's like evals are pretty polarizing. Some people think they're extremely important, and some people think they're a waste of time because they quickly drift or run out of they're no longer useful. And I think, to your point, we need something in the middle ground that will keep up better, not take a ton of time on the builder side, but also have the influence of the domain experts. Really, really fascinating discussion. I think it's really important. We're evolving. The industry is evolving as we're now finally, people are getting agents in production. They're finally scaling past one agent with one tool. And so we need to figure out things like evals, like, observability, like monitoring. And so it's an exciting time. I could talk about this forever, and I love hearing your perspective and what you've learned across your multiple startups. But we are getting close to time, so I want to put your website up on the screen. This is FabrikLabs.ai, and maybe just give us a quick rundown of how people can get in touch, who should be trying out Fabrik, and what's the best way to follow along with your business and product journey.
As a matter of fact, we are still pretty early on, so we have like a couple of customers. If you want, you can just literally directly reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my email. That is my FabrikLabs email, or you can also book a demo through a website. You can also put your credentials through there, and we're gonna contact you through your email, and we'll be able to set up a demo for you. We're gonna have some of the products in the future that are going to be available fully, by the way, open source. But right now we are working through the demos, and we're setting up everything and onboarding as we're a bit early on, though. By the way, the website is interactive, so if you want to play around about it, you can actually do that.
I highly recommend folks trying it out. I think the website, the branding is really cool. The website's really, really interesting. Like you mentioned, these interactive components. So everyone check it out, FabrikLabs.ai. Thanks again for your time, Karim. This has been a great conversation. I think it's an important time to be talking about evals, and for us to be able to deliver on the promise of AI, we need to make sure that it's actually doing what we say it's supposed to do, and that goes beyond just testing it locally. And so excited to see that you're building in this space and that you're also building open source. That's really awesome. So I recommend that folks check out FabrikLabs.ai. And Karim, I'm sure we'll talk again soon, because there's got to be more to evals that every month we'll learn something new that we should be doing. So thanks again for joining, and talk to you next time.
Thank you, Tyler, so much.
Bye now.